Welcome, everyone. Delighted to have an opportunity to introduce our speakers today, and I believe this is going to be a really, really interesting presentation and a topic of growing significance to many of us working in this field or related fields. That is how we're interacting with large language models, machine learning, AI, and how does that relate to the kind of research we want to do on subjects like place, inclusion, trying to find out what's there and what's not there when we start to use these resources on such a large scale. So our presenters have produced a bunch of really cool stuff at the National Library of Sweden, KB, including a bunch of LLMs which have been designed to work with Swedish language materials. And this is important. A lot of these models we're familiar with, they kind of start out with English language materials, and it's important to expand that. So we have two speakers, Börjeson, who's the head of research and development at KBLab at the National Library of Sweden. We also have Martin Malmsten, a senior data scientist at the same lab. And so their talk today is entitled, How Do You Feel About Växsjö? Representing and marginalizing places in collection-based research. And I think my intuition is that this is going to be extremely fascinating for many of us because it's really engaging with these kind of problems. What goes into these models, what comes out of them, and what difference they make. So in the interest of time and giving our presenters the floor, I'm happy to yield to you all. And my name is Frank. I'm here from time to time, providing what sort of insight you have to the CESTA community. So welcome again, welcome to our visitors. Feel free to please come back again and take it away.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Thank you for having us, and thank you for coming here. And speaking about places, this is a weird feeling for me. I used to live here in Palo Alto. I did a postdoc over at school ed. So for me, I'm not sure if I'm coming home or if I'm going away. It's mixed feeling. It's sad, but it's also very nice to be back. Yes. This is what we're going to try to do today. So with a tiny it's a bit of a self-reflection. We'll try to say a few things about how we want to try to develop KBLab as research infrastructure to improve the research on the collections, and how we will use an analysis of the social spatial marginalization, including the one that stems from our own infrastructure. We will use an analysis of this as a vehicle to further develop the infrastructure. And we borrowed, steal something from Peter. Peter here. There you are. Who has sort of coined the term evocative search. We want to talk a little bit about evocative contextualization to get back to exactly what we mean by that stuff. And this is one of the. It's nice to have colleagues around the world to give you ideas. And of course, we'll talk about Växsjö and Växsjö. That has already come up in the pre-discussions to this meeting here in this room. It's an important thing. And this is an endeavor in a very sort of early stage. We haven't researched infrastructure, but this is sort of tweak that in another direction. We think we're onto something. And please interrupt us during the presentation or comments. So you don't have to wait till the end to have questions. That's okay. Yes, firewood. I guess you know this, but still, the National Library of Sweden is a typical European national library. They kind of sort of collection dense. We have a lot of collections. It's a sort of a self-contained world and a history that in itself is quite enough for a few lifetimes, and you can sort of get lost in the stacks, both figuratively and literally. It's huge. We lose things down there. We haven't lost a person, but that's, you know, it's just a matter of time. And the formation of the libraries sort of coincides with the early modern Swedish union state and its staten. So it's about control, potestatism, bureaucracy, war, censorship. And now we like to see the library as a sort of a tool for democracy rather than censorship still. And the library sort of rests on a deposit law from 1661 for everything published. So it's like books, pamphlets, commercial leaflets, pizza menus, newspapers. Maybe they didn't have pizza menus like that, but you know, ephemera. Newspapers, dissertation journals, and on it goes. So we have the medieval collections, manuscripts, and early modern print. We have 3 UNESCO World Cultural Heritage, and then we have all the weird stuff. We have an apartment underground that's rebuilt. It's an apartment of the Nobel laureate in literature. Her apartment was sort of moved from where she lived in Stockholm, and it's now underground in our stacks. And there's a lot more of collection of that kind. And then, you know, it goes on. So since the background here for us is KB, we sometimes get stuck talking about the background, but I will not do that today because it's a fantastic thing, a national library. We, the R&D function and the KBLab, we live inside the belly of this beast. And we do 2 things. First thing is that we provide structured access to collections in a lab environment for researchers. So and we do this for external researchers from academia, or not necessarily academia, they just have to be researchers inside the lab. So we give structured access to collections on premises. And this is because of copyright, GDPR, integrity reasons, but also security reasons. The integrity of the collections also gets used to do well. So they need to come to KBLab to conduct the research. They don't like that. It depends on. We're in Stockholm, so if you're researching in Stockholm, it's not a big problem. But if you're in Umeå, for example, in northern Sweden, that's, you know, a long trip. So we see the problem, but we can't really solve it. So we try to communicate to them that they should see upon the collection as an excavation spot or an excavation site. So this is in a practical sense, they need to come to the lab to do their digging there, but also in the sort of Foucauldian sense. So the researchers, they look upon the collections. I don't know if they're aware of this, but they look upon them as archaeological data rather than historical records. And I think for most part, given the kind of questions they have asking the collections, they're correct to do so. And what we do is that we take the data, the digital data that's optimized for storage in you know, database structures, and make them into researchable data sets, flat files. And I'm going to circle back to that because that's the thing, and we're not super satisfied in how that sort of comes up. While at the lab, they have little to none restrictions to do whatever they want with they can't take them away. That's the only restriction. But other than that, we can do pretty much. And for most part, it's a well-working research infrastructure. We started out in 2019. We had 2 projects that were sort of given to us. If you can make these guys happy, then you can continue with your lab. If not, and now we have, in any given moment, about 25 ongoing projects at the lab. And in the evaluation, we sort of we come up very well. A gift to Swedish academia. I like that quote. It's very nice to read about your own. That's my bragging. I will stop there with bragging. Still, we want to move beyond what we have today in terms of research infrastructure. This is from one of the sort of pivotal objects in the collections. The so-called Devil's Bible is the world's largest medieval manuscript, and it has a depiction of the devil in the middle of the book. It's wearing diapers, so it's not very scary. It's also research infrastructure outside the building. I mean, of the beast. And the way we do this is that we train models. So the models for us is to sort of extend, we look upon the collections as sort of part of the commons, and by having large models trained upon the collections, and then we can share the models freely outside KB, we sort of extend that commons for researchers, but also for anyone who wants to use language model. So following the release of the first multilingual BERT from Google, that came in 2018, we started up the lab 2019 in the summer. We sort of realized we can actually beat the multilingual BERT, the Volvo IKEA Spotify APA version, using the language collection. And because we can, we also should, because no one else can, because it's only us who can sort of have that kind of access to the collections and train transformer models. So I entered the KBLab trained by Martin, and it has been downloaded several million times since, because we released it up openly on Hugging. And it's the most, today, the most used Swedish LLM. It's very small. It wasn't when we released it, but now it's kind of small. But it's also very effective, so it's sort of have a high capacity in relation to how big that model is. So it's very practical. You can download it locally, basically on a laptop, and do whatever you want to do with it. So it's used, throughout the governmental sector and the commercial sector. And the lab has since trained and fine-tuned over 70 models. Not all of them are useful, but still. Eleonora, who sits here somewhere back there, she's leading the training of a Swedish-based Whisper on our EU supercomputer. And that's our 7th supercomputer project within the European Commission supercomputer network.
What is the, when you say supercomputer, why is that necessary? What is the...
So the size of the models we train on, also the size of the data we need to put into them, it would take forever to train them locally. We have some, NVIDIA DDX servers, but it's just small stuff. That has been sort of very important for us to have access to that system.
I guess my follow-up is that expensive for you? Or
no, it's free. Or it's prepaid by taxpayers. We were the first governmental organization in Europe actually to use this system. So they like us. We're sort of also it's a library, so it's not everything is life science. So they like us. And these computers are fast. So we use now Leonardo, which I think is 6 or 7 in the world on the 500 list of supercomputers. When I started at KB, I had no idea that I would work with. So much of my time goes to thinking about supercomputers. That's the Leonardo right there. Why should we train Swedish models? Well, most multilingual models, they contain Swedish, but the proportion is limited and of questionable quality. Variations of Swedish is sort of, they made invisible in this model by the lack of Swedish training data, but also by the overly anxious prompt engineer interfaces for generative LLMs. So complete genres, content, topics, dialects, socialects, and accents and sentiments are made invisible. Because they fall outside the definition of possible and or acceptable output when applications are implemented based on this run-of-the-mill multilingual models. So, in lack of a better word, we will refer to this as marginalization. And for a small resource language like Swedish, this is a real problem because these models really get used, and we don't have so many options. So that's why we need to do this. And this is how we look upon this. There are a lot of sometimes pressure on the lab to exclude data that are viewed as inappropriate, but we can't really do that. Our collections are wide and deep. So every aspect of toxicity is present in the collections. Misogyny, homophobia, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, racism, class contempt, ageism, lack of respect for Växsjö. We're going to see an example of that later. Unfortunately, it's from me, but still. And on it goes. So everything ugly you can think of, we will have it in the collections. And in addition, everything in the collections is nothing in the collections is true. Everything is, it's not fake, it's fiction. but sometimes people see the library as a source of sort of a big lake of facts. No, it's a big lake of fiction. And we still need to be able to represent the collections to the full extent. It's the biggest collection of Swedish and of Swedish language. So someone needs to be able to sort of handle that. So the collections are not and cannot be edifying, and they cannot be true. But in the totality, they can still mediate a deeper truth about Swedish language, Swedish culture, Swedish history, as it is, not as it should be. And we're not at all concerned with or interested in sort of idealized pure Swedish. Of course, we are after the sprawling, inclusive, inappropriate message totality. So we need LLMs that contains almost everything, that allows almost. Well, what if we can't include everything? Well, maybe it's not even there to include to begin with. So in many ways, we think that the labs work with the large language models or with language models in general has been successful in country marginalization of Swedish language. The sort of the most obvious example is when we train sound models. We have variations of dialects in our collections, and we also work with other authorities that have that kind of data in their collections to train models that will sort of understand all the ways that Swedish are spoken. So even if you're from Skåne, that's really hard to model on that. I can tell you that's southern Sweden. Or if you're from Northern, the models should get everything and be able to sort of, for example, turn that speech into text, no matter where you're from. And that also goes for sociolects, obviously, and etc. So all sort of varieties of Swedish we are interested in being able to represent. And many Swedes, they have an accent because they come from another country. So their version of Swedish is slightly different. And they may have a sort of with them a grammar that's not sort of the typical Swedish grammar that you will find in the policy, be spoken in the parliament or whatever. And that should also be, we should be able to reflect that as well. We suspect, though, that through the collections themselves, because they're not complete, and also how we use them and make them available, that we perhaps also contribute to marginalization. And in this case, in this room, we're more specifically to spatial marginalization. What places get mentioned? Who gets to talk about whom and about what? And do we, as the lab, amplify already existing marginalization? Unequal numerical representation in the collections, that's a natural thing. You have Stockholm with 2.5 million in the metropolitan people in the metropolitan area, Växjö with 100,000 people, and the village Växjö in the northern part of Sweden, which has about 500 inhabitants. I think it's really hard to figure out how many actually. But are there more subtle marginalization processes in play? Can we capture?
So can I ask you to back up if the question isn't relevant to tell me, but when you say that your work has already been successful in counting marginalization, did you mean there insofar as you've already incorporated sort of a wider range of
Exactly. Thank you. Exactly that. Växjö is a small town in southern Sweden. It has a decent university college and a small city. Everyone in Sweden knows what Växjö is. Växjö, on the other hand, is a small village outside Bollnäs, which almost no one knows about. I know they have an elementary school, a home village association, and that's about it. And that's my kind of place. I like these little villages. When you write Växjö in a word processor, it will have a red curly underline. If you write Växjö, you will not. And searching for Växjö online, you get this, of course. So it's sort of a mundane example still. This is also true in our own search service for newspapers. So we search for Växjö with an S, and this is the hits. This are the Swedish newspapers, number of hits, and we get this in the system. So it sort of questions us. We can see here, these are the big papers. That's the sort of equivalent of Swedish New York Times, I guess. And then there are the local papers. These hits, if you go into this, Söderhamnstidningen, it's actually about Växjö with an S. Same for Hudiksvall and this one, used on this one. But in the bigger ones, Svenska Dagbladet and the national newspapers, it's just misspelled. So it's sort of false positive hits. And this is, I put the abstract for this session on LinkedIn, on my LinkedIn page, and I got this reaction. I want to read this with the dialect, you know, I won't get it right now. So he was pissed off. So the express perceived spatial marginalization here, as in the LinkedIn exchange, it's like reading a shorthand for social conflict and social hierarchy. It's very emotional. You get really, you know, like that. It's kind of stuff. It's very direct. It's also directional and relational. It has sort of a direction, and it's very intuitive. So everyone gets the message. Immediately when I read that, you know, the subtext is that someone from Stockholm, and it doesn't really say I'm from Stockholm. He just assumes that, and he's correct in this. And in a way, unexpected. As soon as you sort of move around in this space, we were trying to illustrate marginalization of Växjö in relation to Växjö, but ended up on the wrong side of someone from Växjö in relation to Stockholm-ish. So capturing these places in the motion and directions from on an infrastructural level, that would sort of augment our research infrastructure considerably if you're interested in these questions about social conflict, social hierarchy, etc. It will also provide us with the means to, if not to mitigate, but to at least identify and describe. I think that's pretty. This is pretty. If you can do this, it's pretty good. The social spatial marginalization in our collections. This is a different problem, but I'm going to sort of talk about how they are related. We see that in relation to the possibilities, we think that the research conducted at the lab underperforms. There are a lot of serial computing going on. They use outdated models. I'm talking about the academic research coming to the lab. They have an obsession with the LDA models. I think it's because they learn how to do that. And here we can help. I mean, the computational techniques and the transformer-based models, they are so well established now that we can rationalize the research process and do a lot of that for the scholars, them being the academic researchers using that. A more troublesome thing is that there's a lack of contextualization. We rationalize as per above here. We still want the scholars to, using the labs to be, you know, scholars. They have to do the interpretative work. They have to bring the academic, you know, the quirkiness into the research process, and they have to be able to play sort of methodological, analytical game. Now, often they don't. And they sort of rely on us producing these flat lines. And the fundamental part of playing that game is to be able to tentatively contextualize anything we do based on the collections. And it's not just to avoid being sort of textually insular, but it's also that contextualization is, in many cases, for the kind of research that people do at lab, that's the critical analytical act, to bring in a context, to see the text in relation to something. And an obvious context is, of course, space and geography. It would be lovely, for example, to see a proper GIS project relating to the collections. We haven't seen that. Still though, can we, by means of research infrastructure, I mean, we work with research infrastructure, so we think of solutions in terms of research infrastructure. Can we facilitate for researchers to play that game of that sort of methodological analytical game? It would be easy for us to pre-model on the collections and add to a flat file. We would have, for example, if it's text collections. I mean, we have collections in all modalities, but should we do it for the text? We could have the text box, we could have topics added to there for, you know, from per topic or whatever, entities, sentiments, and then something else, and then something else, etc. And in relation to finding and describing social spatial marginalization, me and Martin are thinking about using systemic grammatical information from the systemic functional grammatical language model. It's a bit confusing here because SFP model is a theoretical model, not AI model. We think that that could be a good way to capture hierarchy and direction, things that we sort of are often when we look at marginalization. And we have done a pilot study indicating that it would be kind of easy, it would be sort of easy to train such a model if you have a good annotation. Annotating is super hard. We're also thinking about doing a zero-shot approach to this. The thing is, what if that approach does not pay off? It could be, you know, it could be that we don't arrive at a good model. It could be that the SFP approach doesn't really, you know, cut the mustard as it were. Or it needs to be complemented. And for sure, it will have to be complemented. We need to have entities, for example, in there. We want to add proper geographical information or the information about populations or what have you. Know. We don't want to have to create a new flat file for each new take on the problem at hand. Flat files are none, and they're also a bit dumb. And frankly, we don't want to bottle feed the researchers. They sometimes want us to do that, but we want them to jump in at the deep end and try different contextualization themselves without having to update the stationary flat file. And nowadays we do that for them. And also the really interesting questions can really be contained into dimensions. So after all, we're a library, so we have access to linked data. KB was the first national library to use a linked catalog. So we should use that. I think I did that. So rather than working through the flat files, maybe this is alien to you. Maybe you're not having even been, you know, ever used the flat files. We want to enable the researchers to use information graphs to allow them to do the weird quirky connections themselves. So in other words, we will provide them with an infrastructure for evocative contextualization. And this takes some serious underlying information architecture to accomplish this. And so I will leave the floor to Martin to sort of continue from there. This is just one specific.
I did not build that catalog. I initiated it much more confidently for me. So I got this question: is Växjö marginalized? And the answer is we don't know, which is unfortunate or good in sort of in the research infrastructure sense. But that's sort of that's the short answer. We don't really have that information in our systems or in our collections. So why don't we have that? we built this infrastructure, as Louis said, to support 2 separate projects when the lab was started. They needed access to huge amounts of data. They were going to do their analysis themselves. They used MBA topic modeling. So we built this infrastructure which dealt with access, and it needed to be fast. There's massive collections. I have a background in linked data, so I thought it would be pretty neat to do this as linked data. So I'm going to say words like linked data and Sparkle. Who has any idea what that is in this room? Okay, so if just ask, just interrupt me and ask if I'm being too technical. I'll talk a bit about linked data. So the idea is that everything in this infrastructure should have its own identifier, which would make it easy for researchers to, when they have something to say about, for example, a paragraph, they would annotate it with that URI, and then we could sort of track their research. And our goal was that we should be able to sort of fold their research into our infrastructure. That would be pretty neat, we thought. So we made it linked data, or rather linkable data, because no one actually linked to it. So that's unfortunate, but this, yeah, we'll get to that. It turns out that researchers, they're very fond of tabular data. I don't know if this is what you use as well, but this sort of idea of a graph of information that you can traverse and extend. I don't think anyone actually used that, to be honest. I was very happy with it. It does have information. It does have some metadata. For example, you have the place of publication and political leaning of a newspaper, for example, which is good to have when you're doing your analysis. But it turned out that it's pretty flat. It's like this. I mean, this is in Swedish. This is sort of a rural drama where someone has built the wrong kind of sidewalk, apparently. So if you look at it sort of from a linked view, then it's simply, okay, this page is part of an issue. This issue is part of a serial publication. There's some information about that publication. And if you look at this page, then yes, there are segments. The segments have some information. These segments have identifiers. So it's sort of, it works as linked data, but the sort of, it doesn't tell you anything about the actual content of the page. It doesn't tell you anything about what happens. So that is the sort of, that's what the researcher needed to do, and it took them a while. But if you look at what was actually happening, then of course there's a huge amount of places being talked about. There is, well, the sidewalk is more of a promenade, says Benny. There's a passive aggressive question about this man who has turned down a job offer from some other city. There's some sort of, yeah, something is going on. And of course, more places. And there's a lot of sort of stuff happening within text. There's a lot of directionality towards, in this case, Växjö, because they're mad about this person who took a job in Växjö instead. And there's a lot of information that is not captured at all in the current infrastructure. So every researcher needs to do that on their own, and they do it again and again and again. The idea that we would reuse data the researchers created, we haven't been able to realize that. And I think some of them were really careful about using the identifiers, but still, it hasn't happened, to be quite honest. So I feel that there are 2 ways to tackle this, and you need both ways. You could either go, you could either go into the material, try to extract more information, where we have our robust models like NER, we have sentence BERT and the SFG model, for example. We can apply that to the text in the infrastructure and store that so that researchers can reuse that. For example, if we want to do semantic search, we can apply larger LLMs, for example, if we want to extract meaning and directions. Well, that's the wrong image, but okay. We could use clip, for example, to extract embeddings for images. And that will leave us with sort of this graph instead, where we've extracted a lot of information. Place of birth for photographers and authors is a weird thing in Sweden. Where you live is open information, but you're not allowed to use it. So, because we're part of the EU, so it's available to anyone, but you can't use it. So yeah, so the place of birth can't use that, but place of publication, yes, of course. Sort of someplace connected to the editor, yes, I think so. So they sort of extend the graph with information that we have mined from the text itself. And maybe if we use larger models, then that could be pretty good. Like in this case, this is an article about someone throwing tomatoes at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Just extract the sort of the sentiment that something happened that is connected to this person or connected to this place, or rather maybe with direction as well, from this place to this place. These people are about nothing, these people over here.
Just out of curiosity, like when I've experimented with this kind of thing, one challenge that comes up is the ambiguity in the tags. So like if you ask one of these, GPT-4 or whatever, to give you like a list of sentiments associated with a particular text, first off, it's not that stable. And secondly, it'll give you like a range of different options. And I guess like I'm making a bit of a point, but also the question is just, is there like a danger in going down this road in the sense that, it seems like you're trying to capture a lot of nuance and, diversity of content, et cetera, but then you inevitably are producing stuff that says like negative, positive, or like political leaning, like,
yeah,
these are all,
yes,
could be considered pretty thin reeds to stand on.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you're right. This is also why we wanted to use SFG, because from what I understand, it's fairly good at capturing direction and being fairly precise. Yeah. If you just throw a sort of a standard LLM, that will happen. If you use sort of a smallish LLM, then it will mix stuff up. A bigger one, my experience, is better at separating, for example, what happened to what person. But yeah, this is the sort of, this is very experimental. That's why I hope I did at least. Yes, apply a number of robust models. Those work. The other one might work. We will get a huge amount of sort of statements about sentiment that might be true or not. On the other hand, this is exactly what the research group did. So.
Yeah. So, but you are absolutely correct. And that happens all the time, and it happens in a lot of research projects. So they build this whole thing upon jelly, basically. And we think that, well, one possible sort of approach to capture this would be systemic functional grammar, which is sort of, it's a qualitative method. But I think that we can model that. That's where we have this pilot stuff. It seems to be working out pretty good. Then you can capture, especially we want to see the relationship between Google Spot to Google, those kinds of processes. But yes, it is a problem. Sort of, it seems good on the surface, but you don't really know what happens. And next time you do it, you'll get right. Yeah, that's a big problem. But we're trying to get away.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a bigger problem than the methods that they use today, though.
No.
So there's one one way to go is to sort of dig deeper in the material we have to extract information and link to it, or rather extract information. On the other hand, linked data is very good at connecting things that maybe you don't have control over. So the other part of that is to link to external data. So for example, is Växsjö marginalized? I don't know, there lives 500 people there. So it's hard to know, are we supposed to measure the sort of the amount of times it's being mentioned in national newspapers? Because if I don't know how many people live there, then that number means nothing. So that's where linked data shines. You can sort of draw in the external context and use that. So my hope at least is that we could get both graphs and tabular data, because when the researchers, when they do sort of create their corpus that they work on, they usually do that as sort of a pre-step to the actual research. And then it takes a while for them to realize, oh, they made a mistake, then they need to do it again. Or we need more context, I need to do it again. Sparkle, which is the sort of the query language used to go from, let me show that. Oh, later. Is very good at creating tabular data from graph queries. So sort of that's the other way. If one way is extracting more information from the text, the other is to connect that to external data. So it would look something like this, where the clouds is some other information, probably Wikidata, I would guess. So doing it this way would sort of extend the graph to a huge amount of information that you don't have control over. So people would need to check that, of course. And again, it's not really that different from what we do today. So this would sort of be the situation. You have a huge graph where we have all of these statements that we've extracted from the text, and we have the information that is linked to from external resources, and then we use Sparkle to formulate the query. There's no Sparkle actual query text there because it's indecipherable unless you know it. But that's the idea. Text that mentioned Växjö. Okay, give me everything from this graph. Yes.
It is a quick question. Is it forced to give a binary sentiment indication between positive and negative?
No.
Because I just saw the named entity and it does not make sense for me to have a positive sentiment with it.
No, you're right. It's no. And, I mean, the thing is, for me at least, I mean, these are sort of puzzle pieces. Every piece of this needs to be done, or will be iterated. I mean, to me, this is more of a pipeline product.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm mixing metaphors here, but I think. Text that mentions Växjö, very simple. You don't need Sparkle to do that. On the other hand, text that mentions places where August Strindberg lived, the National Library has no idea where Strindberg used to live. That information is in Wikidata. We could have it, but we probably don't. That's not what we do. If we go further, text that mentions places where one of his wives lived. Sort of the who was married to who, we don't keep track of that either. And this one, text bad-mouthing places where a wife of August Strindberg lived that also has a football stadium that seats at least 20,000 people. We don't have any of that information. We only have the texts. All of everything else is external. But as long as we've created these connections, this is definitely a query that you can use Sparkle to get the answer to. Because that football stadium is described somewhere in Wikidata or somewhere else, wherever you have. I'm not saying that this is a good query, but it's an advanced one. And the researcher using something like this would have to check the source material, of course, as any other type of research. But that is sort of the idea, to use linked data, to actually use linked data, because we used it before, but the research didn't use it. So there's sort of take two of using linked data to try to solve this problem of we need more context with our data. And when the researchers do it, all of that is done once for them, and then they leave it and we can't use it. The idea of the research infrastructure from the beginning was to sort of do something that could be not for these 2 projects alone, but rather something that could be used for project 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I feel that we haven't been able to actually, well, I mean, the infrastructure is used by other projects, but we don't have any data from the researchers that we can fold back into our, yes.
No, that's first, I mean, I think that's an amazing ambition, and I hope that you all succeed, because it would be truly remarkable. Are you thinking, would one solution be to kind of like chop up and like randomize? Like, I can imagine like one reason why researchers tend to be kind of possessive of their materials, even though they come to you, you give them the flat table, you know, you do, you know, but then they go run their regressions on it, and they don't want to share it with anybody else, or they don't want it to be, anyhow. So long story short, is it something that could be like chopped up so that it wouldn't necessarily be identifiable as the, you know, coming from?
Well, either that, or you could, Link Data Spark is also very good at using distributed data sets. So you could easily just give access to sort of, this project has access to the data sets that have been produced by this, only by this project for 5 years or whatever, and then anyone could use it. So yes, you could, you don't need to sort of show everyone everything directly. If that was.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. But I was just wondering, whether, like, if you could, if I were in your shoes, maybe I would pause it to the researcher who comes in and say, hey, okay, I'll make you your table so you can go do your thing. And in return, after you do your thing, and all of this like labor that we put into tagging up this particular set of things, I'm gonna take that and put it in a blender and then like feed it back into.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the idea here is that sort of we don't know what will be helpful in when contextualized, because all the models we have, sentiment models or entity models or whatever, they also evolve so fast. So we want to add different data. You know, yes, in 6 months the whole sort of the possibilities of what we can do has changed. So we want to be able to be flexible about that, to build sort of. So maybe the most important thing for us to sort of reuse is not so much all the flat files, but perhaps the way to get to them. Right.
Yeah, that's my last slide. I have to say though, yes, they're being protected, but I also have to say that within the same project, they come to us sort of between researchers and try to ask us to interpret their own data. So it's
I plead guilty.
Okay, so that's it for me. I don't know. Do we handle it?
I don't really have any more slides. We're having a little play here. We're going to do this back and forth now for 20 times. Someone's going to stumble and fall. But so I think it says in the abstract for this presentation that we're also going to present an idea for a research paper. I'm not really going to do that. I think if we get this in place, it's worthwhile writing about. But for us, it's we want to test these ideas a little bit out of our geographical context, which is Sweden and Scandinavia, to see if this is something that is this really interesting. Are we thinking too much about the technical sort of possibilities and architecture to do this because we're fascinated about that? Or is this something that could be usable for others? And we would be super happy to talk more about this here until Sunday, but there's also this thing called email and etc. So this is an invitation if you want to be part of this in small or to some small extent or bigger. You're super welcome to talk more with us about this. I'm not going to say so much more now. This is what we have. Thank you.